On this Monday night, the backlash to that Trump rally in New York City.
There's literally a floating island of garbage. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
How the racist and vulgar remarks could haunt him. Also tonight, decision drama in 2 provinces. Saskatchewan heads to the polls, while BC prepares to finally name a winner. Plus, dressed like the KKK, volunteer firefighters in Nova Scotia apologize for who showed up at their Halloween party. And honored for their service, 134 first responders in Manitoba who went above and beyond, inducted into the Order of the Buffalo Hunt.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. 8 days until the U.S. presidential election, and millions of Americans have already made their choice. More than 42 million have cast ballots in early voting. That's a little lower than in 2020 when the pandemic led to record early turnout. It is a tight race again, and both candidates know it. Donald Trump campaigned today at a faith summit in Georgia. He'll be at a rally in Atlanta tonight. Kamala Harris is in Michigan, focusing on the economy and on shaming her opponent.
A floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Puerto Ricans deserve better.
Harris's team launched this campaign ad within hours of Trump's rally in New York City last night. There were crude jokes and racist remarks, and critics say it had chilling echoes of another night at Madison Square Gardens in 1939. That's when the Nazis held a huge rally there. Jackson Proskow on the backlash to Trump's rally in the final week of the campaign.
Donald Trump's MAGA carnival, his final pitch to voters, came before a packed crowd in New York.
The United States is now an occupied country.
That dark, disdainful message was completely overshadowed.
America is for Americans and Americans only.
As speaker after speaker served up a buffet of bigotry.
She is the Antichrist.
And delivered racist attacks against Kamala Harris.
The first Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president.
Her and her pimp handlers will destroy our country.
It was a series of blatantly hateful jokes about Latinos that may have done the most damage.
And these Latinos, they love making babies too, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
The outrage was immediate. Puerto Rican celebrities like Bad Bunny, Jennifer Lopez, and Ricky Martin quickly spread word to their millions of followers.
Confirming just how little Donald Trump cares about Latinos.
Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. Its residents are American citizens. And more than 1 million Puerto Ricans live and can vote in swing states.
I mean, 7% of the voting population of the electorate in Pennsylvania is Hispanic.
Trump's campaign later disavowed the comments about Puerto Rico, yet there was no mention made of the other racism on open display at his rally.
What he did last night is not a discovery. It is just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual.
In these final days of the campaign, Harris is trying to draw as much of a contrast between herself and Donald Trump as possible. And on Tuesday, she'll hold a rally on the Ellipse outside of the White House. That's the exact same spot where Trump held his speech on January 6, 2021, shortly before his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building in an attempt to overturn his election loss. Donna.
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. Hundreds of early ballots cast in the U.S. presidential election have been burned. One incident was in Vancouver in Washington state. A few hours before, another ballot box was set on fire in Portland, Oregon. Police described the acts as targeted and intentional, and patrols are being stepped up around ballot drop boxes. On Tuesday, November 5th, we will have live coverage of America Votes, a Canadian perspective on this election. We'll be streaming live from Washington, D.C. It starts at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, wherever you watch Global News, including globalnews.ca, YouTube, the Global TV app, Pluto TV, and Prime. British Columbians have been waiting more than a week to find out who won the provincial election there, and now they have their answer. The NDP is expected to form a majority government after winning a riding by just a few votes. Global BC's Legislative Bureau Chief Keith Baldrey is with me. Keith, this is about as close as it gets.
Yeah, talk about a nail-biter all day long, Donna. So again, all eyes have been focused all day on the riding of Surrey-Guildford, which the BC Conservatives had won, or at least held on election night, by 103 votes. But when the mail-in votes were counted over the weekend, that lead dropped to just 12. And here's the current makeup of 18-vote lead for the incumbent Gary Bigg of the NDP. There are only about 20 ballots yet to count, so I think it's fair to say he's won the seat. However, it will go to a judicial recount because the difference there is less than 1/500th of the total voting population. So this will go to a judicial recount. We've seen recounts, and we've seen it in BC and other provinces as well. They rarely are reversed by a judge, but it can happen. But right now, why that riding is so important to the BC NDP, that gives that party now a one-seat majority, 47 seats in a 93-seat legislature. The Speaker will have to be appointed or elected. That may require the Speaker to vote in some scenarios, but it is the majority, and that's a different look than what they had on election night when it was just 46 seats for the NDP. So all eyes on Surrey-Guildford, and it looks like the NDP has brought that riding home and enable it to form a majority government.
Okay, Keith Baldrey and Victoria, thank you. It is election day in Saskatchewan. The Saskatchewan Party, led by Scott Moe, is widely expected to win another term, but its lead in the polls narrowed during the course of the campaign, giving Saskatchewan NDP leader Carla Beck the possibility of flipping the political script in that province. Our chief political correspondent David Akin is in Regina to watch that race. David.
Well, Donna, the Saskatchewan Party is currently the country's longest-running political success story. 4 majorities in a row, and perhaps a day they win a 5th. This province is 120 years old, and voters have changed the party in power just 8 times. That's right, 8 times in 120 years. The current run started when Brad Wall won his 3 majorities in a row. Scott Moe took over and won his majority in 2020. But before that, the NDP had a long run. They had won 4 terms in a row, starting with Roy Romano in 1991, finishing with Lorne Calvert's loss to Brad Wall in 2007. So that's just one change in government in the last 33 years. But voters might be making a change today. So there is a path to power for the new NDP leader Carla Beck, but it is a narrow path to victory. It starts, here is the current electoral map of Regina. The NDP has pretty much got to win everything in Regina, but that will not be enough. We go up to the biggest city in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon. The NDP have to pretty much sweep Saskatoon. That is still not going to be enough. The New Democrats have to break the Sask Party's dominance in rural and small city Saskatchewan, and that means New Democrats have to see some wins up in Prince Albert, down in Moose Jaw, maybe over in the Battlefords, or perhaps down in Yorkton. Or voters in this province can do what they usually do at election time and say, nah, we're good, no change needed, stay the course, we'll see you again in 4 years. Donna?
Okay, David Akin at the touchscreen in Regina. Thanks, David. The CRTC, Canada's media regulator, has granted Google a 5-year exemption from the Online News Act. Google must now pay $100 million to Canadian news outlets within 60 days. Google agreed last year to pay Canadian news publishers $100 million a year in order to be exempt from the law, which compels tech companies to enter into agreements with news publishers to pay for content reposted on their platforms. A volunteer fire department in Nova Scotia is apologizing for what happened at its Halloween party. 4 people showed up in costumes that made them look like members of the Ku Klux Klan. The local fire chief posted on social media the department is very sorry. He said, most times we think it is a costume without really thinking of the big picture or the past it represents. He says the 4 people were not firefighters and that they should not have been allowed into the event. In 2 days, Quebec will become the first province in Canada to allow a person to request medical assistance in dying before their condition makes them unable to consent. It applies to people with serious and incurable diseases, such as Alzheimer's. The move violates the criminal code, but the federal government will not challenge it.
This is an issue that is incredibly sensitive, that I don't think there's very many lives that haven't been touched by it.
Health Minister Mark Holland says the federal government will launch a nationwide consultation on advanced requests for medically assisted deaths next month and will publish a report in March of 2025. First responders who attended the scene of a bus crash near Carberry, Manitoba in June of 2023 were given a special honor today.
On behalf of the people of Manitoba, what you did that day represents the best of this province.
They were inducted into the Order of the Buffalo Hunt, one of Manitoba's highest honors. 134 fire, ambulance, and police personnel, plus helicopter crews and 911 dispatchers were honored. They all helped in the aftermath of that terrible bus crash along the Trans-Canada Highway in Manitoba. The bus was carrying seniors on a day trip, and 17 of them, most of them from Dauphin, were killed. Conservatives make their pitch on housing. Coming up, would cutting the GST on newly built homes make a difference? Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is proposing a change he claims would help lower mortgage costs for Canadians and speed up home building. If elected, he says he will scrap the federal sales tax Canadians have to pay on newly built homes that sell for less than $1 million. Mackenzie Gray looks at what difference that might make.
It's at the heart of the Conservatives' political pitch.
The number one cost for a home is government. Government bureaucrats, government taxes.
And Pierre Poilievre promising a substantial cut. A Conservative government would eliminate the 5% GST on new housing units that sell for under $1 million.
Getting rid of the GST on new home builds will stimulate 30,000 additional homes built every single year.
The Conservative proposal, just like a key Liberal one. The government scrapped the GST on purpose-built rentals last fall.
It's making a difference.
To the delight of housing experts like Mike Moffat, who likes Poilievre's plan and believes the Conservative leader's 30,000 unit estimate is accurate.
I think on the tax side, I think the Poilievre folks now own this. This plan is far more bold than anything we've seen from the government.
One thing Moffat doesn't support, how Poilievre plans to pay for the estimated $4.5 billion tax shortfall.
We're going to cut 2 programs for sure and more beyond that.
It's one of the rare times the Conservative leader has said what he would cut. 2 housing programs valued at $10.4 billion. First, the Housing Accelerator Fund, where the feds give cash to cities that loosen zoning rules. The other, the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund, used to build things like wastewater infrastructure.
They came up with this stuff on the backside of a napkin after Googling housing for 5 minutes.
Drawing the ire of the housing minister.
They want to cut the programs that are going to deliver housing for low-income and middle-class families today.
But more housing was needed yesterday, with the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation saying an additional 3.5 million new units are needed to be built by 2030 to restore affordability. And the people in charge of building them believe both the Liberal and Conservative plans can help, but only in some areas of the country.
In our more expensive markets, like the GTA, like the Lower Mainland in BC, even the average house price is above $1 million.
And Mackenzie is with me now. Mackenzie, on another topic, today is October 28th. That was the deadline some disgruntled Liberal MPs gave Prime Minister Trudeau to decide about his leadership. Is there any ultimatum? What have they said or done today?
Well, this deadline is going to come and go, and Justin Trudeau is still going to be Prime Minister, Donna. And there's no ultimatum from the disgruntled MPs on what they're willing to do about it, but there is a push from a few of them to have the Liberal caucus hold a secret ballot vote on if the Prime Minister should stay or go.
I think the way to move forward for the sake of party unity is to hold a secret ballot vote.
A secret ballot will put this to rest, and we need to have a finality to this.
And I do think a secret ballot would be an appropriate way of showing that there is unity within the caucus and with the party.
Now, Donna, there's no formal way for those Liberals to force a caucus vote on Mr. Trudeau's leadership. He'd have to agree to it, and there still is a lot of support for the Prime Minister from his colleagues.
Trudeau is Connor McDavid, and he's doing quite well. And, the last 3 playoffs, the elections, we've won.
But the big question is, if there was a secret vote, would public PM supporters stand behind him, Donna, or would they stab him in the back?
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. There are concerning new numbers about how many Canadians are relying on food banks. Food Banks Canada's annual report says there were more than 2 million visits in March of 2024. That is almost double the number of monthly visits compared to 5 years ago. The report highlights who is relying on food banks now. Nearly 18% of visitors were employed, while 70% lived in market rent housing and 32% were newcomers to Canada. The organization says rapid inflation, housing costs, and insufficient social supports are driving up poverty and food insecurity in Canada. Allegations of ballot box stuffing ahead. Georgia's president accuses Russia of election interference. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets outside Georgia's parliament today. They believe the recent election there was rigged. International observers claim there was ballot box stuffing and intimidation. The pro-Russia governing party was declared the winner. Georgia gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, and 17 years later, Russia invaded. It still controls about 1/5 of the country. Georgia is located in a strategic region between Russia and the Middle East. As Redmond Shannon reports, what happens next could decide Georgia's long-term future.
Georgians applauding their president Salome Zurabishvili. Her mostly symbolic role is apolitical, but she called for this rally to protest the results of Saturday's parliamentary election, a vote she says was stolen. And this is why: allegations of electoral fraud. The Electoral Commission has declared the incumbent pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party winners with 54%. Despite some exit polls predicting the pro-European Union opposition parties had a collective majority.
I'm accusing the ruling party of having used Russian forms, Russian methods, and probably some type of Russian planning for this really special operation.
Election observers say they witnessed chaos at polling stations, intimidation, and, quote, unprecedented levels of bribery. 90% of votes were cast electronically.
We express deep concern about the democratic backsliding in Georgia.
Georgian Dream's founder is a billionaire who made his money in Russia. This year, the party introduced a law targeting foreign funding of non-governmental organisations, after which the EU froze Georgia's membership bid. Georgian Dream framed this vote as a choice between war and peace.
That if the population voted for the opposition, somehow Georgia would become the second front of Russia's war in Ukraine. We cannot underestimate the power of this message.
16 years ago, Moscow invaded two separatist regions of Georgia. Both are still occupied by Russia. The Kremlin and Georgian Dream deny any Russian influence in this vote. Opposition voters aren't buying that.
It's robbed from Georgian citizens, and by Russian dream. It is not Georgian dream in reality.
Canada has joined the US and EU in calling for an investigation, and some of the Georgian opposition parties are threatening to boycott Parliament. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
In the Middle East, Israel has banned UNRWA, the United Nations relief agency for Palestinian refugees. It is the largest responder to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The Israeli parliament approved a bill banning UNRWA's activities in Israel and the occupied East Jerusalem. UNRWA calls it outrageous. The UK Prime Minister says it jeopardizes the entire international humanitarian response in Gaza and the delivery of health and education services in the West Bank. Israel claims UNRWA employees are involved in terrorist activities. Hundreds of UNRWA workers have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. Israel's military says it's detained about 100 men it describes as terrorists during a raid on a hospital in Gaza. The IDF says the hospital inside the Jabalia refugee camp had been used by Hamas, claims denied by local health officials. The hospital was treating about 200 people at the time and was severely damaged in the raid. Those left behind say there is no medicine, medical supplies, or food within the hospital. Israel claims it found weapons, money, and intelligence documents. Next, should newspapers be endorsing political candidates? Newspapers have a long history of endorsing political candidates in the late stages of a campaign. So when the LA Times and the Washington Post decided last week not to endorse either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, there was quite an uproar. Some staff resigned. There are accusations the paper's billionaire owners interfered. A Washington Post editorial cartoonist created this, a blacked-out sketchboard. "Democracy dies in darkness," she said, a twist on the paper's own slogan. Eric Sorensen looks at why the move not to endorse has touched such a nerve.
It was a shock when the Los Angeles Times spiked its editorial endorsement of Kamala Harris for president, the decision made by the paper's billionaire owner Patrick Soon-Shiong. The editorials editor, Mariel Garza, resigned in protest. But a day later came a journalistic thunderbolt. from the newspaper synonymous with American political coverage, The Washington Post. An endorsement of Harris was already drafted, but was blocked by the publisher, who answers to another billionaire owner, Jeff Bezos.
This is how American institutions fail to protect us.
The Post's editor-at-large resigned, saying the decision is a sign of what's coming if Donald Trump wins the election.
The bullying of the media and the acquiescence of the media to Donald Trump's wishes. This was a preemptive capitulation on the part of Jeff Bezos for purely business reasons.
Bezos, the founder of Amazon, also owns space company Blue Origin. The Associated Press reporting that Blue Origin executives met with Trump soon after the Harris endorsement was dropped. The Post's former editor, Marty Barron, calls the decision cowardice, coming days before the election.
It was not a decision made in consultation with the editorial board. It was a decision that, according to the Post itself, its own reporting, that was made by Jeff Bezos, and the circumstances are just highly suspect.
In contrast, the New York Times opinion section blared this headline. Newspaper editorial pages have long endorsed political leaders separate from basic news coverage. For some, it's a practice that subverts the independence of today's news organizations. But the editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer suggests newspapers must seek the truth and be honest in their judgments.
There are two ways that fascism shuts down the media. One is you get fascist governments that come in and do it, force it. And the other is that media becomes so afraid of what might happen, they do it to themselves.
Chris Quinn says he hopes this sparks a discussion about the value of newspaper endorsements and the importance of a free press. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Wedge Pond in Kananaskis Country, Alberta. Thanks for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.